Ethan, a 33-year-old programmer living in the fast-paced rhythm of Seattle, felt burnt out despite having it all: a good job, a nice apartment, a modern life. One day, he abruptly shut down his computer, packed his bags, and drove deep into the forests of Oregon. He wasn't searching for answers, he just wanted silence. But in that very stillness, a tiny creature unexpectedly taught him the greatest lesson of his life. Ethan used to think he was on the right path. At 33, he had a stable remote programming job, a comfortable apartment overlooking Lake Union, and a schedule packed with meetings, emails, and deadlines. His life was a string of mornings with coffee and to-do lists, evenings with self-improvement podcasts or Netflix series, punctuated by a vague emptiness he couldn't quite name. Each day, it seemed like the more he worked, the less he felt. Less connected. Less inspired. Less alive. As the signs of burnout became impossible to ignore: sleepless nights, trouble focusing, sudden irritability, Ethan tried everything: going to the gym, digital detoxes, books on mindfulness. But it all felt like temporary patches. He began to wonder, was I living by someone else's map? One Friday evening, after a particularly draining Zoom meeting, he looked out the window. Seattle bustled on, but inside him, there was only noise. He shut his laptop, opened Google Maps, and searched for something he'd never considered before: meditation retreat near me. 3 days later, Ethan drove more than 5 hours south to a small meditation center tucked deep in the Oregon pines. No cell signal. No Wi-Fi. No meeting schedules. Just him, the wind, and silence. Ethan wasn't expecting anything profound, he just wanted a place to breathe. But on the first morning, as he sat on a wooden bench in the back garden, closed his eyes, and took a long, deep breath, something small happened. A soft, faint buzzing near his ear. He peeked. A hummingbird hovered midair, its wings almost invisible, just a blur of motion. It gently approached a wildflower, sipped nectar, then darted away, all within seconds. And in that fleeting moment, when the whole world seemed to pause, Ethan unknowingly began a journey he had never planned, one that would lead him back to himself. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off the hummingbird. Just a tiny creature, weighing barely a few grams, yet it seemed to possess something he had long lost: complete presence in the moment. The bird wasn't in a hurry. It didn't seem like it was working. It wasn't distracted. It didn't need a schedule. No to-do list running through its mind. It was simply being fully, naturally. Ethan sat still, watching its every delicate move, the impossibly fast flutter of its wings, the gentle touch of its beak to the flower's center, the way it hovered, then vanished into the air as if it had never been there at all. But in those brief seconds, it left a deep imprint on his mind. Could I live like that? The question rose suddenly. Not literally become a hummingbird, of course, but to live with that kind of unwavering attention, unpulled by the past, unburdened by worry for the future. Ethan didn't return to his room that morning. He stayed on that wooden bench for hours, just listening, the wind moving through the leaves, distant footsteps from someone else at the retreat, and the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to do anything. He was simply being. And slowly, he began to understand something those mindfulness books had always said but he'd never quite grasped. Peace doesn't come from controlling the world around you. It comes from letting go within. That afternoon, Ethan joined a short meditation session. No lofty philosophy, no complicated teachings, just sit upright, breathe in, breathe out, and observe the mind like watching clouds drift across the sky. At first, his head was full of noise, work, emails, unresolved relationships, even whether he'd left the kitchen light on back home. But like the first chill of stepping into cold water, the chaos gradually settled. Ethan didn't reach enlightenment, but he found the one thing he needed most, inner quiet. And just like that morning's hummingbird, he began to learn how to pause his wings long enough to witness the quiet miracle of right here, right now. After that afternoon's meditation, Ethan returned to his simple room at the retreat with a strange, unfamiliar feeling: stillness. Not the stiff silence of sitting alone in his apartment, but a stillness that felt alive, like a calm lake mirroring the sky, deep, steady, and full of quiet life. He began to settle into a different rhythm. No phone notifications. No meetings. Each day began with the sound of a wooden bell echoing through the forest and ended with the chorus of insects in the night. Ethan spent hours meditating under the porch or in the garden, where the grass still held the morning dew. At first, sitting still wasn't easy. His mind resisted, it was bored, it feared missing out, it replayed old conversations and plotted out the future. But as one of the teachers said, you don't need to push thoughts away. You just don't have to follow them. That sentence became his first key. Ethan started watching his own mind gently. Every time he was swept into a thought, he simply returned to the breath. Inhale. Exhale. Right here. Then, the subtle shifts began. He noticed how sunlight slipped between the leaves. He caught the scent of damp earth after a night of rain. One morning, while sipping tea, he realized he was actually tasting it, not just swallowing it out of habit. Slowly, Ethan began to understand what the hummingbird had embodied so effortlessly. Presence wasn't some lofty spiritual luxury. It was the foundation of a meaningful life. He also started to see all the things he had missed while living at his old pace: rushed hugs, wordless meals, conversations with loved ones where his mind was elsewhere entirely. One afternoon, while meditating beneath a large tree, a soft smile came to Ethan's lips. Not because he had thought of something clever, but because, for once, he wasn't thinking at all. There was only wind, the scent of grass, and the solid feel of earth beneath him. It was the first time in a very long while that he felt completely full, without needing anything more. And in that fullness, Ethan realized he had just crossed an invisible threshold, a doorway back to himself, not by running away, but by stopping and listening. The days that followed unfolded in a slow, deliberate rhythm, each one soaked in awareness. Ethan began to feel as if a veil had been quietly lifting from his eyes. Every simple moment, a cold morning breeze, the crunch of dry leaves beneath his feet, sunlight filtering through a window took on an almost surreal vividness. He was beginning to reconnect with something he had long forgotten in the noise of city life, the world around him. No longer made of concrete, emails, and lifeless numbers, his world now was trees, sunlight, and the rhythm of his own breath. In the long stretches of meditation, Ethan began to feel something deeper than anything he'd ever found in a self-help book: everything is connected. One afternoon, sitting beneath an old pine tree, Ethan suddenly remembered something simple his mother once told him when he was a child: "We don't live above nature. We're part of it." Back then, her words had passed through his ears like hundreds of other well-meaning lessons. But now, they returned to him with crystal clarity, as if the forest itself was gently reminding him. He watched the fallen leaves on the ground and realized they weren't really ending. They were returning to the earth, nourishing roots, becoming part of the cycle that would give rise to new life. And just like that, everything, even himself, was part of something larger. The sense of separation and loneliness he used to feel in Seattle began to dissolve. Not because he'd found the answer, but because he saw clearly that he had never truly been separate. He didn't need to become someone to find his worth. He only had to recognize that he already belonged to something vast and whole. One early morning, he saw the hummingbird again, hovering by the same flower from that first day. It was still tiny, still quietly doing what it was born to do, but this time, Ethan didn't just see a creature in flight. He saw a mirror. A reflection of himself learning to be present, to let go, and to trust in the quiet wisdom moving through all things. And in that moment, Ethan whispered to no one in particular, "I don't need to understand this universe to belong in it." The morning Ethan left the retreat, the air was crisp and the grass still held a soft layer of mist. He packed his things in silence, feeling neither rushed nor reluctant. It wasn't that he wanted to leave, but he knew he was taking everything that truly mattered with him. On the drive back to Seattle, there was no music playing, no 10 Steps to Master Your Life podcast in the background. Just the steady hum of the tires on the road, and awareness. Each mile, each tree passing by the window, felt like a quiet return not to the city, but to something new and strangely familiar: his own life. Back in the old world, everything looked the same: overflowing inboxes, a packed calendar, crowded streets. But Ethan wasn't the same. He began to carry that slowness and mindfulness into the ordinary. In the mornings, he spent a few quiet minutes sitting by the window, watching sunlight slip through the blinds, instead of diving straight into his laptop. He drank coffee not to wake up, but to truly taste the gentle bitterness on his tongue. He no longer checked his phone at red lights, no longer filled every silence with noise. Silence had become a companion, a soft space where he could hear himself. Of course, things weren't perfect. There were still stressful days, looming deadlines, and old habits that crept back in. But the difference was, Ethan didn't get swept away anymore. He had learned how to pause, take a deep breath, and return to the present. And in those moments, he would remember the hummingbird in the Oregon forest, still fast, but never frantic, still in motion, but never anxious. Ethan no longer searched for enlightenment or a perfect life. He simply looked for ways to be fully alive with what he already had. And in that, he found something he'd spent years thinking he had to go far to discover: peace. And so, each day, as the sun rose through the same familiar window, Ethan would gently remind himself with a simple phrase: I don't need to do more to be enough. I just need to be here.